We're working to connect a region of over 600 mil bridges between our lands.
Hello and welcome to ASEAN in Focus. I'm Maricar Velasco delivering to you the latest news in and around the ASEAN region. On today's headlines, heavy rains due to thunderstorms were experienced in Metro Manila this morning, which may persist within the next hours. Google commits to train 3 million small and medium enterprise owners and employees on digital skills in Southeast Asia by 2020. Indonesian President Joko Widodo and his Vietnamese counterpart Tran Dai Quang meet in Hanoi on the sideline of the World Economic Forum on ASEAN. Heavy rains due to thunderstorms were experienced in Metro Manila this morning, which may persist within the next hours. This according to the country's Weather Bureau. Pag-asa's thunderstorm advisory number 1 issued at 9:10 a.m. that the rains being experienced this morning in Metro Manila are only because of thunderstorms and not yet because of the typhoon Mangkhut, which is still outside the Philippine area of responsibility. However, the heavy rains will be accompanied by lightning and strong winds, which might persist until 11 a.m. and may affect areas near Metro Manila. Pag-asa's thunderstorm advisory said all are advised to take precautionary measures against the impacts associated with these hazards, which include flash floods and landslides. Meanwhile, Pag-asa said Typhoon Mangkhut is expected to enter the Philippine area of responsibility this afternoon, as it is estimated to be 1390 east of southern Luzon and is moving westward at a slow pace of 20 kilometers per hour. Mangkhut has maximum sustained winds of 200 kilometers per hour and gusts of 245 kilometers per hour. Pag-asa said that Mangkhut's strength could further intensify while it approaches the country and could have wind speeds near the intensity of Super Typhoon Haiyan, Philippine named Yolanda, which struck the Philippines in November 2013. Typhoon Mangkhut will be named Ompong once it enters the country. Senator Antonio Trillanes IV has changed his mind and said that he will stay inside the Senate premises upon the advice of some senators, a few hours after he had said he was prepared to leave the Senate grounds after the Supreme Court ruling denying his petition for a temporary restraining order. Trillanes said that he came out with his decision after allegedly making direct engagements with the units from the armed forces of the Philippines that were assigned to arrest him. His fear that he could still be arrested any time once he leaves the Senate grounds, even if the Supreme Court had cited the assurance made by President Rodrigo Duterte that he would not be arrested without a valid arrest warrant, as well as the assurance of the AFP that court-martial proceedings would not proceed after the President's directive that he preferred civilian courts to take over Trillanes' case. Trillanes claimed that if the units assigned to arrest him are saying that he will still be arrested, it is clear that only means the order had not yet been brought down to them or there is no plan for it at all. He also said that this was advised by some senators to stay at the Senate. One of the senators who advised him was Senate Minority Leader Franklin Drilon, who also told media that it was better for Trillanes to stay inside the Senate grounds. His statement was a turnaround from his earlier pronouncement on Tuesday afternoon that he is already prepared to leave the Senate building and go home to his family after the Supreme Court ruling denying his TRO petition and prayer for injunction on the supposed government threat to arrest him. The High Court, in its decision denying Trillanes' petition for a preliminary injunction and a TRO, took judicial notice of the categorical pronouncement of President Duterte that Senator Trillanes will not be apprehended, detained, or taken into custody unless a warrant of arrest has been issued by the trial court. The senator had been spending his nights inside his Senate office since September 4 when President Duterte's Proclamation number 572, voiding the amnesty granted to him by former President Benigno Aquino III, was published in a newspaper of general circulation. Threats by U.S. President Donald Trump to slap more punishing tariffs on Chinese goods are set to dominate a meeting of Asian business bigwigs and leaders that opens Wednesday in Hanoi. The escalating trade spat between Washington and Beijing has caused global ripples and is being closely watched in Southeast Asia, where many export-focused economies are set to gain from the fallout. Trump has already imposed 25% custom duties on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods, triggering a tit-for-tat response from Beijing, and vowed last week to increase tariffs to hit $200 billion in Chinese imports very soon. According to Fred Burke, managing partner at Baker McKenzie in Vietnam, ASEAN countries don't want to count their chickens before they hatch, but he thinks they see it on a net basis as a gain for them because it means shifting manufacturing into Southeast Asia that was earlier in China. Rising labor costs in the world's second largest economy have already precipitated a push into countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, where Adidas shoes, H&M t-shirts, and Samsung phones are made on the cheap. However, the trade war has accelerated that process, with several Chinese firms turning to the region to produce items from bike parts to mattresses in a bid to avoid the new U.S. tariffs. Meanwhile, Indonesian President Joko Widodo and his Vietnamese counterpart Tran Dai Quang meet in Hanoi on the sideline of the World Economic Forum on ASEAN. Trade and South China Sea territorial disputes were discussed during the meeting. Watch this.
Thứ hai, cam kết hỗ trợ nhau nắm bắt các cơ hội liên kết kinh tế khu vực nhằm tăng cường hợp tác thương mại song phương và khối ASEAN. Hai bên nhất trí tạo thuận lợi cho các mặt hàng xuất khẩu chủ lực của nhau, nỗ lực đưa kim ngạch thương mại hàng hóa đạt 10 tỷ đô la hoặc cao hơn vào hơn năm 2020 theo hướng cân bằng.
Yang kelima, Yang Mulia Presiden Wang dan saya juga menyambut baik kemajuan yang telah dicapai dalam perundingan Kota Bodak. Hal ini tentu akan berkontribusi besar dalam memastikan Laut Cina Selatan menjadi kawasan yang aman, yang stabil dan damai.
When visiting the Philippines, Manila or Quezon City is a popular destination. But oftentimes the hustle and bustle of the city can be more stressful on your vacation. So when you feel the need to reconnect to nature or relax again, there's a beautiful oasis just outside of the city called the Garden at Ciudad de Victoria. Some of the species that you can see here include hydrangea, snapdragon, and stargazers. They're truly beautiful. The gardens at Ciudad de Victoria are so peaceful, tranquil, and beautiful that it's become a haven for young couples and a very popular venue for engagement photos. The next time you want an escape from the big city, the garden at Ciudad de Victoria is a wonderful place to visit.
Pep News, Linggo, alas 4 hanggang alas 5 ng hapon.
Welcome back. Several Southeast Asian leaders are attending the 2018 World Economic Forum on ASEAN that opened in Hanoi on Wednesday. The opening event, which has the theme Southeast Asia's Priorities in the Fourth Industrial Revolution Era, will be an opportunity for leaders of members' countries to discuss concerns and options at a time where there are many technological breakthroughs. Take a look.
Aniko, you're a professor, and all these people are students here, so they're used to hearing professors. Do you think, Annie, that ASEAN and the region is prepared to embrace the fourth industrial revolution?
But at the heart of ASEAN is the ASEAN way, but at the same time identifying with ASEAN. So I would like to see cross-cultural movement. I'd like to see a lot more exchange between students across the 10 countries. And that's how we build identity. The next I, and I think Minister spoke about it very powerfully, is innovation. We need to unlock the enormous entrepreneurial skills within ASEAN once. And through technology, you could leapfrog. You could actually not be inundated with legacy. The third I, to me, is very important. It's about inclusiveness. I think the more we have technology, the greater the digital divide. And so while I wrote about having the sixth sense of digital skills, there are still many people within ASEAN, within individual countries, that do not have access to healthcare, to payments, to financial accounts, and even to education. And my last I is integration. I think we do not work hard enough. We need more hard work. Integration calls for working.
So what role does a company like Google play in spreading innovation in a region like ASEAN?
So look, when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution, at the core of it is a digital economy, right? And when you think about ASEAN, the 10 countries combined, and the digital economy in ASEAN, it's actually quite sizable, growing very rapidly, but it's got enormous potential. So one way we look at sort of the digital economy is as a percentage of overall GDP. So if you look at digital economy as a percentage of overall economy in ASEAN, it's about 7%. China's at about 16%, the top 5 EU countries at about 25%, the US is at about 35%, right? So in terms of full potential of the digital economy in ASEAN, we've got about 5 times growth that we can achieve, and achieving that as an ASEAN, as a group of ASEAN countries, really is about making sure that we have one integrated digital economy. All right. So what does that really mean? I think it's very important to have free flow of data across countries. It's important to have seamless payments across countries, and finally for goods and services as well to move across these countries. Right. But all of that still won't actually help ASEAN achieve its full potential. The most important to address one of the concerns or issues that Professor raised, which is how do we make sure that humans win over machines, is skills, right? And I think skilling is by far the single most important thing. And as a company, as Google, we've specifically focused on skilling. And skilling at all levels, right? For students, for developers, for entrepreneurs, and also small and medium businesses. And today, I wanted to take a minute on small and medium businesses. If you look at small and medium enterprises, SMEs, in ASEAN, they account for about 50% of all GDP in the region, and they account for 80% of all jobs in ASEAN are actually small and medium enterprises. And if you think about how will ASEAN capture the full potential of the digital economy, we believe that probably the single biggest lever or area that we should focus on is skilling the small and medium enterprises to be able to capitalize on the digital economy. Free flow of data.
The event, which lasts 3 days, attracts more than 1,000 people, including 6 presidents or prime ministers. Meanwhile, Google commits to train 3 million small and medium enterprise owners and employees on digital skills in Southeast Asia by 2020. Watch this. At the open forum, including governmental.
I'm delighted to announce today that officially we are going to announce that as Google, we are committing to train 3 million small and medium enterprise owners and employees on digital skills by the year 2020. So across the 10 countries, we will commit to training and making sure that these small and medium enterprises, therefore, can really get the best out of get the best out of digital and the fourth industrial revolution, which is how do we make sure that humans win over machines is skills. Right? And I think skilling is by far the single most important thing. And as a company, as Google, we've specifically focused on skilling. And skilling at all levels, right? For students, for developers, for entrepreneurs, and also small and medium businesses.
By gaming at the age of...
Participants at the open forum, including governmental and corporate officials, scholars and students, focused their discussions on how to ensure that the potentials offered by startups and entrepreneurship will create a brighter future for everyone. The WEF, established in 1971, is a non-profit foundation headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. The forum engages the foremost political, business, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. The sell-off on Asian markets showed no sign of letting up Wednesday, with investors fearing an escalation in the China-U.S. trade row after Beijing said it planned to impose anti-dumping sanctions worth billions on Washington. The news adds to a sense of pessimism across trading floors in recent weeks as the world's top 2 economic powers stand on the cusp of an all-out trade war that observers fear could batter the global economy. It also comes as dealers struggle to deal with a brewing emerging market financial crisis and overshadows hopeful noises from Canada that a revised NAFTA deal is imminently possible. China said it would ask the World Trade Organization next week for permission to impose more than $7 billion in sanctions annually on the United States over anti-dumping practices. The WTO will discuss the issues on September 21. The case dates back to December 2013, when China took issue with the way Washington assesses whether exports have been dumped at unfairly low prices onto the U.S. market. Beijing's call comes after Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on all goods coming from China, which he says is using unfair trade practices that are harming American jobs. He has also railed against his country's massive trade deficit with China, which hit a record high last month. Hong Kong was again among the worst performers, having fallen into a bear market Tuesday, marking a 20% fall from its record high touched in January. This week, ASEAN parliamentarians, lawmakers, and refugee experts have convened in the Philippines for a series of refugee forums. Aimed at fostering an exchange of knowledge and regional perspectives on the refugee situation across Southeast Asia, more than a dozen Philippines MPs from across the political spectrum are expected to attend both forums. As one of only 2 countries in Southeast Asia to have signed the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees in its 1967 protocol, the Philippines has historically been considered a refugee-friendly country. Not only does it have a legal protection framework, it also has a functioning national system for registration and refugee status determination. Refugees are allowed to stay, work, and travel abroad and are able to integrate into local communities. On September 11, a forum on refugee awareness and protection mechanisms jointly organized by the Philippines Committee on Human Rights, ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, and the Asia-Pacific Refugee Rights Network was held in the Philippines Congress. Parliamentarians from the Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia provided insight into the refugee situation in their respective domestic contexts and engaged in an open and frank dialogue on opportunities and challenges for promoting regional refugee protection.
There's a lot of positive things that we can talk about in the Philippines. However, despite that, there's a need for us to review our current protocols. Be sure that the Committee on Human Rights will take the lead in reviewing and assessing current laws and policies with regard to refugees. And I think at this point also, it is high time that the country take a stronger stand as to what's happening in the region. Well, we're not praying that in the future we will have a deluge of refugees coming to the Philippines, but we don't know. Who knows? Who knows, we might even be refugees to other countries. So I think this is just part of our obligation as a member of the ASEAN community, as a member of the global community, in improving laws and policies in the Philippines with regard to the rights of refugees, those seeking asylum, and at the same time speaking against developments in the region that have led to more refugees going to member countries in the ASEAN. I'm particularly referring to what's happening in Myanmar. Majority of the refugees now come from Myanmar, particularly the Rohingya refugees. But even before that, there were already refugees coming from, mostly from Indochina. And as I said earlier, there were those who went to the Philippines and were resettled eventually, or those who stayed behind. So I again join my colleagues in expressing our willingness as parliamentarians in the Philippine Congress to look into this situation and perhaps improve the laws, current national laws on refugees.
You know, during the Cold War, ASEAN of the six, namely the Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, we were able to speak with one voice, especially at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And the world listened to us, and the world come to us. But since the end of the Cold War into the age of globalization, the expansion of ASEAN from 6 to 10 and so on, I think we have been failing to speak with one voice, to coordinate our position and to be recognized and to be respected in the world at large. And there are two issues that are internal to our ASEAN family: the migrant workers and the refugees and the displaced person. Not that they come from the outside, but they come from within the ASEAN community itself. And yet, so far, for the past few years, we have not been able to really sit down together, set the principle, have the master plan, have the mechanism, and so on. So I would like to use this opportunity to urge all of us, and I think the parliamentarians of the Philippines could lead in this direction, you know, to be the prime mover, together with, I think, Malaysia, in particular as chair of APHR, and to come out, you know, that to urge that everyone, all the political leaders, parties, and so on, have to work together, come out with one voice, one position, tell the world, and solve our internal problem. I think this is the most urgent issue at hand. You know, there are problems inside. Let's finish the problems. Thank you.
I hope that this forum will not be the last, and we in the Philippines are thinking of, let's say, crafting this law to strengthen the protection of refugees. And once we've started here, of course, in our own country, and we hope that we can also have an active role in the ASEAN region for pushing for the effective mechanism for the protection of the refugees. Given that, we are hoping to have a close coordination, of course, with APHR, APRRN, and all our colleagues in the House of Representatives and the Senate.
A Thai-based film company has joined the scramble to retell the dramatic story of the 12 young footballers and their coach who were freed from a flooded cave. Since the Wild Boars team were extracted from Tham Luang Cave in northern Thailand 2 months ago, there has been a frenzy of media interest in the feel-good tale that captivated the world for weeks. Documentary makers and Hollywood producers have tussled to get films off the ground, with journalists also spinning book deals from the real-life rescue mission. A Bangkok production company called De Warren Pictures are the latest to agree financing to make their visions called The Cave, with shooting planned for November. According to Katrina Gross, the producer of the movie that will be directed by Tom Waller, a Bangkok-based filmmaker of mixed Thai-Irish descent, the project is already set. The operation to save the boys who wandered into the cave after a football training session and became stuck as floodwaters surged in involved the expert cave divers from across the world. They were found after 11 days huddled on a muddy ledge without food or fresh water, floodwaters lapping ominously below them. An ex-Thai Navy SEAL died in the run-up to their daring extraction of the group, who were heavily sedated as they were carried, pulled, and dragged free from deep inside the cave. Initially, after the rescue officials imposed a blanket ban on coverage, fearing for the boys' mental health, with the world's media camped up in the rural Thailand. However, efforts to shield the team have crumbled, with TV networks jostling for interviews and the Thai junta organizing a seemingly endless stream of media events. In one of the most bizarre, last Thursday the boys were encouraged to crawl through a mock-up tunnel in a recreated cave in a Bangkok mega mall, where a zone has been dedicated to the rescue. And that is the latest news in the Southeast Asian nations. Stay updated about the ASEAN region. I'm Maricar Velasco and I am one with 25.